You've found nightfall murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. "6 months now, the velvet darkness has been my running track. Suburbia sheds its skin at night, becoming a realm of profound quietude, stark vacancies. Street lamps bleed elongated, skeletal shadows onto lawns. Houses resolve into hulking silhouettes against the bruised twilight sky. My circuit winds through Cedar Ridge, a tract carved out in the 60s. Clone homes, identical stretches of grass, sentinel mailboxes lined up in obedient rows. I've learned the geography of its flaws, every fissure in the pavement, the specific cadence of each territorial canine, the precise arc of porch lights that blink awake as I pulse past. That particular October Tuesday unfurled like any other. Air crisp, low 50s, the heavens swept clean. Ideal conditions. 3 miles melted behind me. The homeward stretch beckoned. Then I registered him. A man planted in the front yard of 316 Elm Drive. Just standing, utterly immobile. His face tilted skyward, toward the second-floor panes, arms slack at his sides. Dark attire, perhaps a coat and trousers, difficult to discern in the gloom. My pace faltered. By 9, Cedar Ridge typically drew its inhabitants indoors, sealing itself away. This figure, though, was a study in absolute stillness, something carved from night itself. "Evening," I offered, jogging lightly in place, my exhalations puffing into transient clouds. Silence answered. Not a shift, not a flicker. "Hey," I projected, louder, voice sharper in the chill. "You all right?" Nothing. The man remained locked in his upward contemplation of the house. Its windows were vacant eyes, utterly dark. A different rhythm began in my chest, unrelated to exertion, an insistent thrum of wrongness, the profound inertia, the vacuum of sound, the sheer frozen aspect of him. It felt fundamentally incorrect. I edged nearer, hugging the sidewalk's concrete ribbon. "Sir, need any help?" The street lamp positioned behind him rendered his features illegible, a dark cutout against the weathered siding. Yet an unnerving conviction bloomed within me. He wasn't truly looking at the windows. His eyes, I felt with chilling certainty, were shut, or vacant, or something worse. A glacial chill traced my skin. The night seemed suddenly to possess weight, pressing down. The surrounding homes became silent crypts, brimming with unseen things. Slowly I retreated, then pivoted and broke into a run. I didn't risk a glance back until 2 blocks had dissolved behind me. He remained, still gazing, still petrified. I devoured the remaining distance home, the key fumbling in the lock. A scalding shower followed, a futile attempt to wash away the unease, to tell myself it was foolishness. Some fellow admiring architecture, maybe. A realtor scouting, a former resident adrift in nostalgia. Rationality insisted on an explanation, but the wrongness clung, that unnatural stillness, the absolute lack of response, the way the shadows seemed to coalesce around his form. Morning light found me driving past 316 Elm Drive en route to work. The yard lay empty, bearing no trace of the night's vigil. Neglected grass, paint flaking from shutters like sunburnt skin, the mailbox choked with yellowed circulars. I cut the engine, approached the front door. Dust lay thick on the handle. Cobwebs festooned the corners. Dead leaves huddled against the foundation. Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, was out walking her terrier. I flagged her down. "Morning, Mrs. Gable. Quick one. Any idea who lives here?" Her brow furrowed. "Nobody, dear. Been vacant since the Ashworths left back in 19. Foreclosure, poor souls. Mr. Ashworth lost his position, couldn't manage the upkeep." My mouth felt suddenly arid. "No one's taken it on since? No interest?" "Agents say it needs a fortune sunk into it. Likely be torn down eventually," she said, gently tugging her dog's lead. "Why the curiosity?" "Just thought I saw someone in the yard last night." Her frown deepened into concern. "Couldn't have been. That place is sealed up tighter than a drum. I watch it like a hawk. Call the constabulary if any youngsters get ideas. Nobody's been near it in ages." I muttered thanks and retreated to my car, lingering, staring at those blind windows, the desolate patch of lawn where the figure had stood, sentinel. That night, the urge to abandon my run was strong, but yielding felt like surrender. Superstition holds no sway over me. Ghosts and ghouls are fiction. There are to be a mundane truth. I reversed my usual route, approaching Elm Drive from the opposite end, easing my stride as number 316 loomed. Vacant yard, just decaying leaves swirling in the wan light. A sigh escaped me, one I hadn't realized I was holding captive. Then, a flicker, upstairs window, a shadow gliding past, so swift it might have been imagined. I stopped dead on the pavement, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the house. Silence reigned. No illumination, no sound but the dry rustle of leaves skittering across the derelict lawn. An impulse I couldn't name drew me closer, up the fractured driveway, past skeletal shrubs, onto the very spot the man had occupied. The grass lay undisturbed beneath my feet. No impressions, no evidence of presence. I tilted my head back, seeking what he had sought in those second-floor windows. Only darkness stared back through the grimy panes. A cold gust raised gooseflesh on my arms. The alleys between houses seemed to inhale, deepening their shadows. Turning to depart, I froze, etched into the rough bark of the oak tree beside me. Letters, crude, jagged, as if gouged with a blade. "Come inside." The wounds looked startlingly fresh, pale wood weeping against the dark trunk. I ran, faster than ever before, lungs searing, legs trembling, not easing until my own streetlights embraced me. Sleep refused me that night. Images replayed, the static man, the raw carving, the phantom flicker in the window. Nothing aligned, nothing settled. The following morning, I contacted the police, reported a potential trespass at 316 Elm Drive, mentioned the man. An officer noted the details, promised a patrol. The call back came that afternoon. No indication of forced entry, premises secure. No footprints, no disturbance. Case closed. Driven by unease, I plunged into online archives, searching local news for the house, the Ashworths. Articles detailed the foreclosure, a sad but common narrative. Delayed fallout from the '08 crash. Then, a buried detail snagged my attention. The bank struggled to offload the property due to its history. In 1973, A previous owner had annihilated his wife and 2 children within those walls before ending his own life in the basement. A grainy, monochrome photograph accompanied the article. Police leading a man from the front lawn. He wore dark clothes. His face was turned upwards, towards the second-floor windows. My hand began to shake. I snapped the laptop shut. A drive, I needed air, perspective. Inevitably, I found myself parked before 316 Elm Drive once more. Daylight stripped it of its menace, revealing only dilapidation, a structure resigned to demolition. But something was new. Distinct tire treads marked the gravel drive. Recent footprints marred the muddy patch near the porch steps. Someone had been here, very recently. Exiting the car, I followed the muddy trail. It led directly to the front door and stopped. The door itself was slightly ajar. Every rational thought screamed retreat, call the authorities, flee. Instead, I pushed. It swung inward on a protracted, mournful groan. The entryway was a dim cavern. Dust motes danced in the slanted beam of sunlight slicing through the opening. The air hung thick, stale, laced with the scent of decay. "Hello?" My voice felt small, swallowed by the stillness. "Anyone home?" Only the infinitesimal creaks and sighs of an old house settling into its bones answered. Phone out, flashlight app engaged, I swept the beam across peeling floral wallpaper, vacant rooms, bare floors littered with dust and brittle leaves. Footprints, clear in the grime, led towards the staircase. I ascended, each tread protesting my weight. The second floor felt perceptibly colder, darker. The footprints marched down the hallway, terminating at a closed door. Sweat slicked my palms, my heart battered my ribs. Primal instinct shrieked, "Run!" My hand reached for the knob. Before contact, it turned. The door eased open, releasing a rush of frigid air. The room beyond held only a single chair, positioned to face the windows. The same windows that had held the man's unblinking focus. Seated in the chair, silhouetted against the weak light, was a dark form. "Hello?" The word emerged as a strangled whisper. The figure remained inert. One step closer, then another. Floorboards whined. My flashlight beam found the chair. Empty. A soft scuff sounded behind me. I whirled. He stood framed in the doorway. Dark clothes, head slightly upturned, eyes closed. No, not closed. Gone. Smooth, blank integument stretched where eyes should have been. A scream tore from my throat as I lunged past him. His hand darted out, seizing my arm. His touch was arctic. "Welcome home," rasped a voice like desiccated leaves crunching underfoot. I wrenched free, shoved past the sightless horror, scrambled down the hall, tumbled down the stairs, burst out of the oppressive dark into the indifferent sunlight. I didn't cease running until my own door slammed shut behind me. Every lock thrown, every light blazing until the sanctuary of dawn. The police returned, patient but weary. They found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints inside, the front door securely shut. They gently suggested nocturnal exertion might be affecting my perceptions. Recommended rest, perhaps discussing stress management. 3 months later, I sold my house. Moved into a high-rise apartment downtown. My running now happens on a treadmill, under the sterile fluorescence of a gym. Yet sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, My thoughts drift back to 3 Guaistine Elm Drive, to the figure in the yard, to the unanswered question of what awaited in that upstairs room. And sometimes, when sleep evades me, I gaze from my window at the sprawling city lights below. Far down, on the pavement, stands a solitary figure, face tilted towards my window, arms pendant, utterly still, waiting. Keys cool against his palm, phone a dense weight in his pocket, Silas eased through the entrance into the cavernous quiet of the fitness center. Thursday night bled towards 11, the fluorescent tubes overhead casting a sterile, unwavering glare, yet the space felt deserted, resonant only with the soft percussion of his own soles on the vulcanized rubber floor. Solitude was his companion tonight. 10 minutes prior, the last paying customer had departed, the tumblers clicking satisfyingly as he'd secured the main door. His ritual awaited, the methodical wipe down of steel and vinyl, the purging of bins, the silent inventory of iron and cable before plunging the place into darkness. It was a modest domain, parallel rows of resistance machines, a constellation of free weights, the skeletal geometry of a squat rack tucked in one corner, a bench press altar, a trio of treadmills stand and sentinel, utterly mundane, nothing inherently sinister. Yet a disquiet had taken root in these late hours recently, a prickling awareness that hummed beneath his skin even now, barely 2 steps inside. His first act, now ingrained habit, was to silence the wall-mounted speakers. Their usual low thrum of innocuous pop felt grating, a distraction from the meticulous cleansing ahead. More than that, he needed the silence, needed to listen for edicts again, the anomaly that had punctuated the quietude several times this past week. Music extinguished, the air filled with the low electric drone of the overhead lighting. The atmosphere felt curiously dense, heavy. Perspiration slicked his brow, a residue from demonstrating lunges to the final client. He hefted the disinfectant spray, its plastic cool in his grip, and approached the nearest treadmill. Its rubber track bore the dusty imprint of the day's exertions. A spritz, the drag of the rag across the surface. As he meticulously cleaned the machine's edges, a faint metallic ping resonated through the stillness. Subtle, yes, but distinct. Metal kissing metal. He froze mid-wipe, breath caught in his throat. His pulse, already elevated, kicked noticeably higher. His gaze swept the room. The ranked dumbbells impassive on their rack, the hulking machines inert. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the fluorescent hum. Seconds stretched, nothing more. Building settling, he told himself, the familiar flimsy reassurance. Pipes contracting in the walls. He forced the thought away, returning his attention to the treadmill. Yet the solitude now felt less like peace, and more like exposure. He completed the first treadmill and advanced to its neighbor, intent on dispatching the cardio equipment before confronting the weights. As he leaned into the task, a phantom coolness brushed his skin, perhaps the air conditioning cycling on, the vents overhead whispering softly. He wiped the console, checked the empty water bottle cradle. Bending to cleanse the platform near the motor housing, a second sound broke the quiet, louder this time, sharper, the unmistakable scrape of a weight plate against a knurled steel bar. The fine hairs on his forearms lifted, his head snapped towards the free weight zone. Stillness reigned. Barbells rested serenely on their J-hooks. Plates stood in orderly stacks against the wall. No human form occupied the space. He swallowed, a dry friction in his throat. Lowering the spray bottle to the floor, he fixed his stare on the bench press station. The bar was naked, unadorned by plates, yet the sound had been specific, undeniable. He walked towards it, his steps deliberate, undisguised. "Hello," he called out, the word echoing strangely in the high-ceilinged room, knowing full well the door remained locked. Only the omnipresent hum answered. Reaching the bench, he laid a hand flat on the barbell. Cold metal met his skin, immovable. The bright lighting left no corner unrevealed, no shadow deep enough to conceal. Nothing amiss. A knot tightened low in his belly, radiating upwards into his chest. His breathing grew shallow. He held the bar a moment longer, half expecting a tremor, a response. It remained inert. Shaking his head slightly, he released it. Mind playing tricks. He clung to the explanation, resolving to finish his duties and depart. Returning to the treadmills, he retrieved the spray bottle and cloth, resuming his work. For perhaps 5 minutes, the only sounds were the rhythmic swish of the rag and his own movements. A fragile calm began to settle. His heart rate subsided. Finishing the last treadmill, he moved towards the free weights, beginning his customary ritual of organizing the dumbbells, often left haphazardly by weary patrons. Tonight they seemed mostly in order. One by one he lifted them, checked for chalk dust or sweat residue, gave them a cursory wipe, and slotted them back onto the tiered rack. His palms felt damp, but he pressed on, focusing on the repetitive friction of cloth against metal, attempting to wall out the earlier disturbances. He was midway through the dumbbells when another sound occurred, louder still, a percussive thump. Not the violent crash of a dropped weight, but a softer, deliberate placement. His head whipped around, eyes darting to the bench press, then the squat rack, bars motionless, plates aligned, no errant discs on the floor, everything in its designated place. Yet the sound lingered in his ears, distinct, irrefutable. His pulse surged anew. A tremor started in his hands, making him grip the rag tighter. He strode over to the squat rack, examining the stacked plates on its storage pegs. He lifted a 20-kilo disc slightly, letting it settle back against the metal peg. A similar resonance, but not identical. His gaze swept the entire expanse again. Vacant, his shoulders bunched towards his ears. He ran his tongue over suddenly dry lips. Outside noise? The street bordering the gym's rear wall had a chain-link fence. Occasionally, vagrants passed with rattling carts, but the side service door was shut, bolted. Those external sounds were usually muffled, originating from the alley, not echoing sharply within. The weight room itself. He stood motionless, straining to hear, his own heartbeat a frantic drum against the backdrop of buzzing lights that flickered intermittently, a common quirk of the old building. The air felt stagnant. He swallowed again. Right then, he breathed out, a quiet attempt at self-mastery. He returned to the dumbbells, methodically racking the last few. A quick final survey confirmed their order. Next, the resistance machines lining the far wall. Lat pull-down, chest press, leg extension, a silent assembly. He began with the lat pull-down, wiping the padded seat, the wide grip bar, the selector pin, the sturdy frame. His stomach remained unsettled, a persistent unease prompting frequent glances over his shoulder towards the free weights. Focusing proved difficult, his senses perpetually primed for the next metallic retort. The following minutes, however, passed without incident. As he finished the last machine, a measure of relief began to thread through his anxiety. He retrieved the large trash liner from behind the reception counter. The crinkle of the plastic and his footfalls were the only sounds disrupting the profound stillness. He made his rounds, gathering discarded paper towels, empty supplement sachets, used disinfectant wipes from the small bins positioned near each station. The gym remained static, inanimate. He almost convinced himself the noises had been benign, mere structural groans or echoes from beyond the walls. Tying off the heavy bag, he carried it towards the entrance, planning to leave it for morning pickup, and headed towards the reception desk, where his phone, cleaning supplies, and the key to the back storage closet resided. The instant his back was turned fully to the weight room, it happened again. A sharp, metallic clank, shockingly close, as if originating just behind him. He physically jumped, the trash bag slipping from his grasp to land with a soft thud on the floor. His heart hammered violently against his ribs. He spun around, eyes wide, scanning the dimly lit expanse beyond the reception area. He saw it then. The barbell on the bench press was moving. A subtle oscillation, a gentle rocking, as if someone had just racked it or perhaps lightly brushed against it. He stared, momentarily uncertain if his eyes deceived him. Hesitantly, his legs feeling unsteady, he stepped closer. He reached out, his fingers closing around the cool steel. It was still vibrating, a faint residual tremor that slowed and ceased beneath his touch. His gaze darted frantically around. Corners, doorways, the ceiling vents, nothing. Only the familiar scent of rubber matting and chemical cleaner. He stepped back from the bench, his breathing accelerating, audible in the quiet. Dampness bloomed on his forehead. His shirt clung uncomfortably to his back. Thoughts raced in chaotic loops. Intruder? Hidden passage? Am I losing my mind? He began a circuit of the machines, peering behind the squat rack's imposing frame, behind the complex web of the cable crossover, behind the water cooler's bulk. No one. Doors secure. Windows intact. He stood in the geometric center of the weight room, turning slowly, scrutinizing every angle. Everything appeared normal, ordinary, except for the frantic surge of adrenaline flooding his system. Should he call someone? Elias, the owner? A friend? The potential ridicule held him back. It was late. He was responsible here. Pull it together. He stood for another long moment, catching his breath. Time was slipping away. Returning to the reception area, he retrieved the fallen trash bag and glanced at his phone. Nearly 11 p.m., right around the time these unnerving events had clustered all week. A chill traced its way up his arms despite the stuffy air. He tried to busy himself, spraying and wiping the reception counter, tidying stray papers, stacking membership forms, his eyes constantly flicking towards the shadowed weight room. Silence persisted. He resolved to finish quickly. Stepping behind the desk to retrieve the floor mop, another clang echoed from the gym, perhaps a plate settling on a bar, or the weight stack shifting on the leg press machine. He slammed his hand flat on the counter, a sharp retort in the silence. Heart pounding, he rushed back towards the weight area. No visible movement this time, but his eyes locked onto the lat pull-down station. The V-bar handle, attached to the cable, was swaying gently, back and forth, a slow pendulum arc. He approached it, standing directly before the machine, watching the inexplicable motion gradually subside. No draft could account for this. The air was still. He reached out, pressing his palm against the cool metal handle to still its movement. His own hand trembled. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, his thoughts. Breathing raggedly, a constricting tightness gripped his chest, making each inhale feel insufficient. He circled the machines one last time, peering beneath benches, his senses straining against the oppressive quiet, broken only by the incessant buzz of the lights and the frantic thumping in his ears. The place was undeniably empty, yet the feeling of not being alone was overwhelming. Mop quickly, then leave. That was the only plan now. He fetched the mop and bucket, walking to the far end of the gym near the treadmills, his footsteps echoing unnervingly. He plunged the mop head into the sudsy water, wrung it out, and began the mechanical back and forth across the rubber flooring. The acrid scent of cleaning fluid stung his nostrils. He tried to concentrate solely on the task, on the rhythmic scrape of the mop. The minutes dragged. Every few strokes, he paused, listening intently. Only the sound of his own labor answered. He moved methodically across the floor, section by section. The gym remained quiet, but the knot of tension in his gut refused to dissolve. 10 minutes of relentless mopping brought him near the squat rack, guiding the damp fibers carefully around its base. Suddenly, a definite sense of movement flickered at the edge of his perception, directly behind him. No sound, no footfall, just an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, a feeling of presence. The skin on his neck prickled. He spun around, wrenching himself so abruptly he nearly lost his grip on the mop handle. The room lay before him, unchanged, yet his stomach churned. His eyes darted between the bench press and the cable station, half expecting to see something stir. Nothing. He was still utterly alone. Leaning the mop against the rack, he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for a second, trying to quell the rising panic. His entire body felt coiled, hyper-alert. A glance at his phone. 11:15 p.m. Enough. He abandoned the mop and bucket where they stood. The rest could wait until morning. Pulse hammering, he strode towards the front reception area, grabbing his jacket, the trash bag, his keys. He hit the main light switch for the weight room, plunging the rows of equipment into deep shadow, their familiar forms morphing into hulking silhouettes. He deliberately avoided looking too long into the darkness. He double-checked the main entrance lock, then activated the security alarm. The silence now felt heavier, charged. His mouth was painfully dry. Swallowing hard, he forced himself towards the final exit. As his hand reached for the last light switch by the door, one final, resonant clang sounded, impossibly close, seemingly right at his back. He whirled around, heart leaping into his throat, confronting only impenetrable darkness. His breath hitched, his muscles locked. Then, absolute silence returned, thick and waiting. His heart pounded against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could see nothing, sense nothing moving in the blackness. He stood frozen for several heartbeats, fighting to regulate his breathing. He couldn't endure another second. He slapped the final switch, plunging the reception area into darkness, wrenched the door open, stumbled outside, and fumbled with the lock, securing it behind him. The night air, cool against his sweat-damp face, felt like a reprieve. His hands shook so violently that his keys slipped from his grasp, scattering on the pavement. He stooped to retrieve them, his gaze drawn back to the gym's dark glass facade. Nothing visible within, but his skin crawled nonetheless. He took several deep, ragged breaths, The street was deserted, a faint breeze stirring litter in the empty parking spaces. His chest remained tight, his mind a chaotic whirl of unanswered questions. He wasn't going back inside tonight. He reached his car, the engine turning over reassuringly. His thoughts remained fragmented, yet one certainty solidified. Late at night, alone in that space, something else was present. It wasn't the building settling, not the HVAC system. It felt deliberate, like unseen hands interacting with the equipment. As he pulled away from the curb, his eyes instinctively scanned the gym's darkened windows, half expecting a fleeting shadow. Nothing appeared, but the unnerving sensation clung to him, a cold passenger on the drive home. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, focusing intently on the road ahead, his body still thrumming with residual fear. Tonight had been the most pronounced, the most undeniable. Tomorrow he would have to return, to face the silence and whatever lurked within it. For now, the sanctuary of home, of locked doors and bright lights, beckoned. Yet, even alone in his car, the feeling of being watched persisted, a chilling echo of the vibrating barbell beneath his hand, a memory that followed him down the empty streets until the click of his own apartment lock offered a fragile, temporary peace. The initial ring felt like static, a stray signal cross on wires meant for someone else. By the third intrusion, a chilling certainty bloomed. Unseen eyes were fixed upon me, and when the 10th call pierced the silence, I knew the life I'd meticulously constructed was irrevocably fractured. It began on a Tuesday, dusk bleeding through the blinds, home from the office grind, a blur of spreadsheets and strained smiles. I'd shed my heels, melting onto the sofa with a sigh that carried the day's weight. Takeout and escapism beckoned. Then, the phone's insistent summons. An unfamiliar string of digits shimmered on the screen. Against my usual caution, some impulse compelled me to answer. "Hello?" My voice, thin, anticipating the drone of a sales pitch or a fumbled dial. Silence stretched across the line, thick and watchful. Just as my thumb hovered to disconnect, a voice emerged, warped and synthesized, like rusted gears grinding. "Ilara," it rasped, "crimson suits you today." A paralysis seized me. My blouse, a deep shade of red, felt suddenly conspicuous. A target. How? "Who is this?" The demand was sharp, laced with a burgeoning panic that tightened my chest. The line clicked dead. I remained motionless, the phone cold against my ear. Coincidence? A tasteless prank orchestrated by colleagues? A deeper instinct recoiled from such simple explanations. Rising, I drifted towards the window, parting the heavy curtains just enough to scan the street below. Lamplit normalcy prevailed. Parked cars gleamed faintly. A silhouette walked a dog, the quiet pulse of my suburban enclave. Yet a sinister undercurrent now tainted the scene. I secured the deadbolts, checked the window latches, the familiar clicks echoing too loudly in the sudden quiet. My fingers trembled, dialing Chloe. "Hey," I began, trying to sound casual when she answered. "Did you, or maybe someone at work, pull a prank call just now?" "What? Ilara, no. Why on earth?" Confusion colored her tone. I recounted the call, the unnerving detail about my blouse. Chloe listened, her silence growing heavy. deeply unsettling, Ilara. Perhaps you should notify the authorities." The thought flickered, but what concrete evidence did I possess? A bizarre phone call. They'd likely advise blocking the number, dismiss it as harmless disturbance. I attempted to banish the unease. Food arrived, the television flickered to life, but the synthetic voice lingered. An hour crawled by. The phone shrilled again, the same unknown caller. I let it ring, 4 beats, 5, then silence. A notification illuminated the screen immediately after. Why the silence, Ilara? Disinclined to converse? My breath hitched. The phone slipped from my grasp, landing softly on the cushions. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Retrieving the device with unsteady hands, I blocked the number. Then, plunging the apartment into darkness, I positioned myself near the window, a sliver of curtain affording a view of the street. Nothing. No lurking figures, no idling vehicles. Still, the sensation of being observed, a prickle on the back of my neck, refused to dissipate. Sleep offered no refuge. Each creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the panes, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. Dawn arrived not as a relief, but as the start of another besieged day. Exhausted, frayed, I called in sick. The thought of navigating public spaces, of exposing myself to that unseen gaze, unbearable. Around midday, the phone rang once more, a different unknown number this time. I ignored it, letting the call lapse into the digital void. Voicemail alert. Then a text. "Staying indoors today, Ilara? Prudent, but concealment is only temporary." A strangled cry escaped me as I hurled the phone. It struck the far wall with a sharp crack before skittering across the floorboards. Madness. Sheer madness. How did they know I hadn't left? Were microscopic lenses embedded in my walls? Was someone perched in an adjacent building, binoculars trained on my window? The following hour became a frantic, futile search, peering behind pictures, tapping walls, inspecting vents. Nothing. The absence of discovery offered no comfort, only deepened the paranoia. The digital assault persisted throughout the day. Each call, each text, peeled back another layer of my privacy, wielding intimate knowledge like a weapon. "That pizza you ordered last night smelled delicious. Perhaps we could share one soon." Your mother would be so profoundly disappointed if she knew about your indiscretion last summer. I wonder if your superiors are aware of those sensitive files you accessed after hours. How? The pizza, perhaps explainable by direct surveillance, but my mother's potential judgment, the specifics of my after-hours digital footprint, this transcended casual observation. It spoke of burrowing deep into the bedrock of my life. By evening, I was unraveling, unfed, unwashed, pacing the confines of my apartment like a caged animal, startled by every phantom noise. Then came the final summons. This time, when my trembling fingers accepted the call, the voice was clear, devoid of distortion, smooth, cultured, laced with an unnerving calm. "Hello, Ilara," it said. "I believe it's time we transitioned from the virtual to the tangible, don't you?" "Who are you?" I whispered, the question barely audible over the frantic drumming in my ears. "What is it you want?" A low chuckle resonated through the line. a sound that feathered ice down my spine. Oh, Ilara, the question isn't what I want from you. It's what you are going to do for me. I'm contacting the police, I bluffed, striving for a strength I didn't possess. No, he replied, his tone unwavering. You won't, because initiating such contact would compel me to disseminate some rather delicate information to certain interested parties. Information concerning the true circumstances surrounding your father's company, concerning the actual destination of those misplaced funds. The blood turned to ice water in my veins. That secret, the one buried beneath years of careful obfuscation, impossible. What do you want? The words were heavy, tasting of defeat. Rendezvous at the corner of 5th and Main, 1 hour, he commanded. Attend alone. Failure to comply will precipitate profoundly unpleasant consequences for you, and for those you hold dear. The connection severed. I stood frozen, thoughts colliding in a chaotic storm. Flight? Where could I possibly vanish that his reach wouldn't extend? The authorities? His threat, delivered with such chilling certainty, paralyzed me. Ultimately, only one path seemed navigable. I retrieved a pen, paper, scrawled a hasty account of everything, sealed it in an envelope addressed to Chloe, leaving it starkly visible on the kitchen table. Keys in hand, I stepped out into the night. The city streets were subdued, slicked with a fine misting rain that cast halos around the streetlights, lending the familiar urban landscape a spectral, dreamlike quality. I parked a block away, the final steps toward the designated corner, measured by the frantic thudding of my own heart. Beneath the sodium glare of a street lamp stood a figure, tall, impeccably dressed, salt and pepper hair, framing a face with a neatly trimmed beard. He projected an air of avuncular success, a stark contrast to the monstrous image conjured by his voice. A smile touched his lips as I approached, though it never reached his eyes. Those remained glacial, appraising. "Ilara," he greeted, extending a hand. "A genuine pleasure to finally make your acquaintance." I ignored the offered hand. "What do you want?" My voice was a threadbare whisper. He chuckled again, that same disquieting sound from the phone. "Direct, admirable. What I require, Ilara, is quite straightforward. Your particular talents applied to a small venture of mine." "What kind of venture?" From his pocket, he produced a slim USB drive, holding it up between thumb and forefinger. "Contained herein is a ledger. Names, account directives. I need you to employ your expertise. Obscure the origins, reroute the flow, cleanse the trail. Precisely as you did for your father." Nausea churned within me. He wanted me to facilitate his illicit finances, to wield the very skills that had entangled me in this nightmare. "And if I decline?" I asked, the answer already echoing in the hollow space behind my ribs. His smile acquired a predatory edge. "Then the calls commence. To the constabulary, to your firm, to your dear mother. Imagine her reaction, learning the true nature of her daughter." I squeezed my eyes shut, the walls of the trap closing in. This was the reckoning, the moment the carefully buried past erupted into the present. "All right," I conceded, opening my eyes to meet his unwavering gaze. "I'll do it, but upon completion, you vanish. No further contact, no more threats. Our association concludes. He inclined his head, proffering the drive. Naturally, execute this task efficiently, and you shall be erased from my awareness. As my fingers closed around the cool metal casing, a reckless, desperate spark ignited within me. How can I be certain, I ventured, that this blackmail won't simply continue indefinitely? One eyebrow arched slightly. You cannot, but Elara, what alternative do you possess? I nodded, feigning acquiescence. Then, in a single, fluid movement, born of long ago self-defense lessons Chloe had insisted upon, I seized his wrist, applying sharp, twisting pressure. He gasped, a cry of shock and pain, his phone tumbling from his grasp. I snatched it, turned, and ran. Behind me, his enraged shouts pursued me, his heavy footfalls echoing on the wet pavement. I ran with a desperation I hadn't known I possessed, lungs searing, legs protesting. Blocks melted away under the frantic pace. I didn't pause, didn't look back, until the illuminated sanctuary of the police station loomed ahead. Bursting through the doors, gasping for air, I stumbled towards the front desk. I need to report a crime, I managed, placing both USB drives, his, and by implication, the evidence against myself, onto the worn counter. And I need to confess to one. The desk sergeant regarded me, his gaze shifting from my disheveled state to the drives, a mixture of bewilderment and professional concern etching his features. "All right, miss," he said, his voice measured. "Perhaps you should begin at the beginning." And so, I did. The story spilled out. The calls, the chillingly accurate threats, the insidious blackmail, and finally, the confession of my own past actions, the shadowed legacy of my father's dealings. It was agony, each word dismantling the future I'd envisioned. Yet, with every admission, a suffocating weight seemed to lift. No more concealment, no more glancing over my shoulder. My arrest followed, inevitably. His capture came later, apprehended while attempting to dissolve into the city's anonymity. Apparently, a known predator with similar operations in multiple jurisdictions. As uniformed officers guided me towards a holding cell, my reflection flickered in a polished surface. Tired, visibly frightened, yet beneath it, a profound sense of relief resonated. The nightmare, the one that had haunted my waking hours for days and shadowed my life for years, had finally broken. The path ahead remains uncertain. Court dates, sentencing, the stark reality of incarceration. But for the first time in what feels like an eternity, I can draw a full, unimpeded breath. The phone will remain silent, devoid of menace. The shadows will no longer harbor unseen watchers. I am not free, not in the conventional sense. Yet, paradoxically, I have never felt such profound liberation. The only voice demanding an answer now is my own. The invitation felt like a summons to stillness, a weekend reprieve promised by colleagues amidst the deep woods. They'd secured a cabin, miles from the nearest town's faint pulse, offering escape, quietude, perhaps the bracing clarity of a hike through untamed paths. Anticipation hummed within me, yet stepping onto the property was like crossing an unseen threshold. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was watchful, profound, amplifying every creak of wood, every sigh of wind through the pines. It felt less like a getaway, more like entering a pocket dimension governed by different rules. We were a quartet: myself, Elias, Silas, the group's restless raconteur, steady Ben, and watchful Clara. Shared office corridors had forged an easy camaraderie, bypassing the need for strained pleasantries. We simply existed together, comfortably. That first day unfolded in sun-dappled perfection. Lazy conversations meandering over grilled food and shared bottles. The simple pleasure of disconnection. As twilight bled into star-dusted night, a pleasant weariness settled over us. Gathered around the crackling fire pit, its flames painting shifting masks on our faces, Silas leaned forward, his grin sharp in the flickering light. "You realize," he began, his voice adopting a conspiratorial tone, "this cabin stood derelict for years. The owner just walked away. Poof, some say he never left the woods." A ripple of skeptical chuckles followed. Silas thrived on unsettling narratives, a connoisseur of the creepy anecdote. But tonight, an unfamiliar gravity underscored his words. "No, seriously," he pressed, his voice lowering, drawing us closer. "The old-timers whisper about it, claim the place holds on to things. They hear noises after dark, strange sounds. People have gone missing out here." "Sure they have, Silas," Ben retorted, a dismissive eye roll accompanying his words. Clara, however, drew her jacket tighter, a visible tremor running through her. "Could we maybe shelve the ghost stories? Being this far out is enough," she murmured, her gaze darting towards the impenetrable wall of trees encircling us. We laughed, steering the conversation towards lighter shores, yet Clara's unease lingered, a palpable thing in the cooling air. I didn't credit Silas's tale, not truly, but the nocturnal woods possessed an undeniable presence, a sense that solitude was merely an illusion. Eventually, the fire dwindled, and exhaustion claimed us. The cabin offered 2 sleeping chambers. Ben and I took one, Silas and Clara the other. Sleep found me swiftly, pulling me under like a tide. But the deep velvet of night was torn, sometime in its vast middle, by an awakening. Confusion fogged my senses. The room was an absolute void, save for Ben's soft, rhythmic snoring from the adjacent bed. I lay still, adrift between sleep and awareness, straining against the darkness. And then I perceived it, a delicate, rhythmic sound from beyond the window. Tap, tap, tap. A chill prickled my skin. My heart commenced a frantic drumming against my ribs. It was faint, almost tentative, like the drumming of fingernails on glass. A glance confirmed Ben's slumber remained undisturbed. Reason insisted it was a branch, wind-tossed debris. Yet the sound possessed an unnerving regularity, a deliberate quality that belied natural causes. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, methodical, as if its source was aware, patient. I remained frozen, listening, logic battling a rising tide of primal fear. After an eternity compressed into minutes, the tapping ceased. A ragged breath escaped me. Imagination, I told myself fiercely. Just the woods playing tricks. But as I tried to coax sleep's return, the unshakable conviction that we were being observed settled heavily upon me. Morning light brought a fragile sense of normalcy. Over lukewarm coffee, I recounted the nocturnal disturbance. Silas, predictably, seized upon it. "See? Told you this place had a vibe," he declared, though his grin seemed a touch forced. Clara's face drained of color. "Elias, you're not joking?" she asked, her eyes wide. I attempted nonchalance, shrugging. Probably nothing. Wind, a branch tapping, you know. But her apprehension remained, a stark contrast to the bright morning. For the remainder of the day, she clung to the cabin's immediate vicinity, refusing any foray deeper into the surrounding wilderness. A pang of guilt struck me for voicing my experience, yet a persistent, nagging feeling that something was fundamentally wrong wouldn't leave. That evening, an unspoken tension urged us towards an earlier bedtime. We retreated to our rooms, cloaked in a strained silence, each harboring a private dread. I lay in the oppressive darkness, senses hyper-alert, straining against the quiet, half expecting the sound's return. Around midnight, it began. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes snapped open. Immobility seized me, heart hammering. The sound was identical, soft, insistent, emanating from just outside the window. Ben slept on, oblivious. Logic screamed again. Branches, animals. But then, a new element threaded through the night. Whispering. So faint it was almost subliminal. A sibilant murmur slithering beneath the tapping. It sounded like hushed, urgent conversation. The words indistinguishable, but the tone chillingly intimate. A cold dread, visceral and profound, crawled up my spine. The urge to wake Ben warred with a paralyzing terror. I lay rigid, trapped between the rhythmic tapping and the insidious whispers, every nerve taut. The unsettling symphony continued for what felt like hours before finally dissolving back into silence. Sleep, when it eventually came, was shallow and troubled, haunted by unanswered questions. The following morning, I shared the full account with Silas and Clara. Terror sculpted Clara's features. Her hands trembled visibly. "This isn't funny anymore," she whispered, her voice ragged. "If this is some elaborate prank, Silas, it's cruel." He shook his head, genuine concern replacing his usual bravado. "I swear, Clara, it's not me," he insisted, his own gaze sweeping nervously across the room. "I didn't hear a thing." Anxiety became our constant companion that day. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent jolts through us. Even Silas seemed subdued, his appetite for manufactured scares replaced by a quiet apprehension. We remained tethered to the cabin, the vast woods now feeling menacing, pregnant with unseen watchers. As night fell again, none of us desired sleep. We clustered in the main room, lights blazing defiantly against the encroaching darkness. Conversation muted, strained, but the inevitable could only be postponed. With forced goodnights, we dispersed to our rooms, the air thick with shared trepidation. I lay taut in the blackness, listening, the silence itself a source of dread. Then, as if cued by our fear, it started. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time, more insistent, impatient. I surged upright, breath coming in shallow bursts, fear a physical presence in my throat. Across the room, Ben was awake, his eyes wide and reflecting stark terror in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. He'd heard it too. "What in God's name is that?" he breathed, his voice unsteady. I could only shake my head, words failing me. The tapping persisted, a relentless, maddening rhythm against the glass. Then the whispering returned, amplified, clearer now, as if the speaker pressed close against the pane, murmuring unintelligible invitations, rasping our names just beneath the threshold of understanding. An icy certainty gripped me. We had to escape. My hand clamped onto Ben's arm, hauling him towards the door. We stumbled into the hallway, erupting into Silas and Clara's room. They were both bolt upright, faces bleached with fear. "We're leaving," I managed, the words barely audible. "Now." There was no argument, only frantic action. We snatched essential belongings, shrugged into coats, and fled the cabin's oppressive atmosphere, plunging into the disorienting darkness outside without a backward glance. The ancient trees loomed like silent judges. Getting away, putting distance between us and that place, was the only imperative. As the car roared to life and sped down the gravel track, the sounds of tapping and whispering seemed to cling for a moment before finally receding into the vast, indifferent woods. Silence returned to the car, heavy and absolute, each of us submerged in the chilling residue of the night. We never spoke of returning. It began as a rumor in an empty room, my own name breathed into the silence, an auditory mirage, I told myself, born of solitude and stillness. Yet the disembodied murmurings intensified, growing insistent, until the very plaster and lath of my house seemed to confess secrets far darker than mere drafts or settling timbers. That first true instance materialized on a Tuesday evening, distinct because I'd just sunk into the sofa, the flickering glow of some true crime docudrama painting the walls. Quietude reigned, punctuated only by the television's low drone and the arthritic groans of antique floorboards. 6 months divorced, solitude was my familiar. Then, amidst a commercial lull, it came, a wisp of sound, barely there. Eleanor, my name, fragile as exhaled frost. I thumbed the mute button, head tilted, straining against the familiar nocturnal sighs of the old structure. Nothing. Imagination, surely, frayed by the show's grim narratives. Such things made phantoms of shadows. But the phantom returned the following night, and the night after. My name, a silken thread drawn from disparate corners. The kitchen's shadowed archway, while I occupied the living room. The upper landing's gloom when I stood before the bathroom mirror. Always solitary, always just beyond sight's edge. Rationalizations bloomed, wind whistling through unseen fissures, mimicking speech, a neighbor's broadcast bleeding uncannily through the shared brickwork, feeble shields against a growing dread. Days bleed into weeks, the whispers shedding their ambiguity. They sharpened, gained clarity, and within that clarity, a resonance stirred, an unsettling familiarity I couldn't anchor. Empty spaces became territories to avoid. Music or television became constant companions, sonic barriers against the encroaching silence. I acquired a white noise generator, its mechanical shushing a desperate hope for uninterrupted sleep. Futile. The voice, it seemed, fed on the static, amplifying its pleas. It began weaving new words into its repertoire. Help me, a desperate spectral entreaty. And later, chillingly, I am coming. Tentatively, I broached the subject with friends, cloaking my terror in casual anecdotes about old house quirks. Their laughter echoed hollowly, their tales of groaning pipes and settling foundations paling against the specific, personal nature of my haunting. Driven to desperation, I contacted a collective of local paranormal enthusiasts. They arrived bristling with electromagnetic field meters and devices meant to capture spectral utterances. An overnight vigil yielded nothing tangible. Old houses have personalities, make funny noises, the lead investigator offered, his smile laced with pity. a silent scream built in my throat. These weren't funny noises. This was a voice. It knew my name. Months crawled by, each marked by eroding sanity. Sleep offered no refuge, concentration fractured. Every moment within those walls became a taut wire of hyper-awareness, ears perpetually strained for the next whisper, the next disembodied call. Then came the night the foundations of my reality crumbled. Dragged from a shallow, fretful slumber, I heard my name, not whispered, but shrieked, an explosion of agony and terror, erupting from the air directly beside my bed. I lurched upright, heart hammering against my ribs, fumbling for the lamp switch. Light flooded the room, revealing predictable emptiness. But standing there, trembling, my gaze snagged on the dresser mirror. Condensation bloomed on the antique glass, and within it, as if traced by a fleeting breath, 2 words shimmered. Remember me. And abruptly, terrifyingly, I did. The elusive familiarity of the voice, the persistent echo. It wasn't just familiar, intimate. The voice was mine. A dam of suppressed memories burst. This house, my childhood sanctuary, the accidents, the brushes with oblivion, water closing over my head in the bathtub's porcelain depths, the frayed lamp cord spitting blue sparks inches from my curious fingers. Each time, a last-second salvation I'd attributed to blind luck, but it wasn't luck, it was me. Other iterations, versions less fortunate, snuffed out within these very walls, their spectral essences tethered here. As this devastating comprehension settled, the whispers erupted into a deafening chorus. Dozens of voices, all echoes of my own, clamoring from every corner, pleading, warning, weeping in unending torment. I collapsed, overwhelmed by the cacophony of my own lost possibilities ricocheting through the house. How could I have forgotten? How had the currents of life, the undertow of divorce, pulled me back to this place, this repository of near fatalities? A sliver of understanding pierced the chaos. Some subconscious fragment had known, had steered me back, yearning for remembrance. The other Eleanors, the ones extinguished, had been trying to reach me, to warn me. Dawn fractured the darkness, bringing fragile clarity. I couldn't remain, couldn't coexist with the constant spectral reminders of my own fragile mortality. Yet abandoning them felt wrong. These echoes, these lost selves, they deserved release. Weeks turned into a feverish delve into the property's history. I unearthed faded records, local folklore. The house stood upon the site of an ancient well, filled in, forgotten. Legends whispered it was a thin place, where the membrane between worlds grew porous. This knowledge led me not to another team with gadgets, but to an old woman dwelling on the town's periphery, spoken of in low, reverent tones. She arrived, her gaze ancient and penetrating, absorbing the house's atmosphere. The moment she stepped across the threshold, a sharp intake of breath escaped her. "Ah, child," she murmured, her voice thick with an unexpected sorrow. "Such a weight you carry." For hours she traversed the rooms, her lips moving in soft, guttural chants I couldn't decipher. The whispers reacted, swirling into an agitated vortex of sound around us. Yet the old woman remained steadfast, her voice rising, a resonant counterpoint to the spectral discord. As dusk painted the windows in hues of bruised plum, a palpable shift occurred. The frantic whispers softened, faded, then ceased entirely, and profound peace descended, lifting an invisible pressure I hadn't fully registered until its absence. The medium turned, her aged eyes luminous with unshed tears. "They are quiet now," she stated softly. "The possibilities have found their way, but they left a message for you." I held my breath. "They bid you to live," she relayed. "Live fully, for all of them. Embrace the life they were denied." That night, sleep came deep and undisturbed, the first time in what felt like an eternity. No whispers, no phantom screams, only the profound silence of a house, finally, truly, at rest. Morning saw me contacting a realtor. I couldn't stay, haunted not by spirits, but by the stark memory of what had been, what might have been. Packing became a ritual, imbued with a startling sense of purpose. I hadn't merely been given a second chance, I carried the weight and privilege of countless chances, each secured by a version of myself, swallowed by fate. I owed them this life. Locking the door for the final time, a faint sound brushed my ear, almost imagined. Not my name, just 2 syllables, carried on the quiet air. "Thank you." A smile touched my lips, a wave of closure washing through me. The voices were gone, their legacy etched into my resolve. Live. Live for us all. And that is precisely what I intend to do. That particular cold clings to me still, a phantom limb of memory. Late afternoon sun bled weakly through the grimy panes as I toiled alone in the subterranean confines, wrestling the old storage vault into something resembling a workshop. Above, a naked bulb sputtered, casting erratic shadows while I pried away decaying timbers and scraped back leprous flakes of paint. Sweat traced paths through the grime on my temples. My hands were coarse with dust, my work clothes saturated with the scent of damp earth and ancient mildew. It was nestled in a corner, shadowed by a low-slung beam, that I first saw it, a hairline fracture bisecting the rough-cast concrete wall. Innocuous at first glance, just a fragile scar on the aged surface. Yet when my fingertips grazed its length, an impossible, arctic exhalation ghosted against my skin, sharp as freezer burn. The fine hairs on my forearms stiffened. Drawing nearer, I pressed my ear to the cold stone. That's when the sound reached me. A voice, a subterranean murmur, thick and indistinct, yet shaping my name. I recoiled, a frantic drum against my ribs. "Mu." Name, breathed syllable by slow syllable, as if savored on an unseen tongue. I silenced the sander, straining to listen. Behind me, only the furnace's low thrumming and the muted growl of traffic, filtering through the narrow casement window. But from the fissure, the whisper returned, fainter this time, withdrawing into the wall's depths. It spoke of things known only to me, intimate fragments of my past, the precise year I'd sought refuge in this house, the unspoken reason Liam's calls went unanswered. My tongue felt like lead. A single bead of perspiration tracked down my neck, disappearing beneath my collar. "Acoustic mirage," I insisted silently, perhaps the labyrinthine plumbing carrying echoes from elsewhere. This house, inherited from my Aunt Alara, a woman remote, veiled in privacy, whom I'd scarcely known, had always felt watchful. Whispers persisted of its former life as a refuge, a wartime bolt hole, though I'd never delved into those murky histories. Now, rooted to the spot, I listened as the voice hummed, divulging secrets, hinting at futures I couldn't possibly verify. A tempest due next Thursday, it promised. A stranger rapping at my door precisely at midnight. Its pronouncements were unnervingly certain, sometimes mimicking my own voice with such fidelity that the distinction blurred within my own skull. Respite was essential. I retreated from the wall, taking the narrow stairs 2 at a time. In the kitchen's relative brightness, I gulped water, lungs heaving, forcing logic upon myself. Voices from a crack? Absurd. Exhaustion, surely. The solution was simple. Seal the fissure, entomb it behind mortar, forget its existence. Yet, descending once more, trowel and compound clutched in my hand. The very air felt altered. The basement seemed to constrict, the atmosphere thick, cloying, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Kneeling by the crack, I aimed my flashlight into the breach. The beam snagged on something peculiar, a subtle, oily luminescence deep within the fissure, like polished metal or slick, wet obsidian. I leaned closer, squinting, but the darkness yielded little beyond a few inches. With grim determination, I began forcing filler into the gap, pressing it deep, resolute on locking away whatever resided behind the concrete. The instant the compound made contact, the voice surged, louder now, straining against the nascent barrier. It jibed, it taunted, adopt on my own cadence, my inflections, hurling back phrases I muttered only in solitude during bleak moments, weaponizing my private doubts. My hand trembled violently. A sudden, focused expulsion of frigid breath blasted from the crack, slicing through my shirt, stealing my own breath in a gasp. I stumbled backward, the task abandoned, half finished. That night, sleep offered no sanctuary. I dreamt of entities devoid of countenance wandering my upstairs hallway. Their heads, smooth and ovoid like polished river stones, hovered above my bed, reaching with limbs like articulated reeds, fingers unburdened by bone. I awoke drenched in sweat, my chest tight, convinced I could still feel the phantom graze of their touch. 3 a.m. Sleep was impossible. I paced the living room until dawn pierced the gloom, the voice and the crack replaying in my mind. The house's silence pressed down, immense and suffocating. I realized then that true relaxation had eluded me since beginning work in those depths. The following afternoon, I employed a different strategy. An old, heavy bookshelf was wrestled into position, wedged firmly against the wall, obscuring the crack from view. Out of sight, out of mind, but the moment it settled, a distinct pressure bloomed at the base of my skull. The voice recommenced, muffled by the barrier but no less insistent. It recounted unverifiable yet chilling details, anecdotes about individuals long absent from my life, small buried humiliations, choices steeped in regret. Then it shifted to prognostication, my tools succumbing to rust, a pipe destined to burst in the upper bathroom, a letter bearing ill tidings soon to arrive. It rattled off these predictions with unwavering, dispassionate confidence. I fought to disregard it, immersing myself in mundane repairs, replacing loose treads on the staircase, testing the circuit breakers, clearing away spectral cobwebs. But the voice infiltrated my consciousness, sometimes so subtly it felt like my own internal monologue, other times rising to a demanding chant, a mocking sing-song iteration of my name. Behind a forgotten crate, I unearthed a tome bound in cracked hide. Inside, Aunt Alara's wavering script detailed notes about the house's previous occupant, a relative entirely unknown to me. She wrote of an anomalous portal in the basement wall, mortared shut decades past. The ink was faded, the handwriting agitated. One sentence arrested me. "It's not trying to heal, it's trying to become." I slammed the ledger shut, pulse hammering. The meaning remained opaque, yet its resonance felt undeniable, sinister. That evening, seeking connection, I tried calling a friend, but the signal dissolved repeatedly into static. My text, asking if he'd ever experienced strange sounds migrating through walls, vanished into the digital ether without reply. Catching my reflection in the hallway mirror, I noted the dark smudges beneath my eyes, the rigid set of my jaw. For a terrifying, fractured second, I perceived my mirrored doppelganger's lips move, though mine were still. A scream nearly tore from my throat. Nerves frayed to snapping point. "Fatigue!" I told myself fiercely. Just fatigue. Drawn back downstairs, I approached the wall again, armed this time with the flashlight and a small geologist's pick. If some physical object lay concealed, I had to know. Carefully, I scraped at the edges of the fissure, widening it just enough for a glimpse. The flashlight beam struck something smooth, gleaming dully, a warped, mercurial surface deep within the cavity, like an old, tarnished looking glass. I saw a distorted echo of my own eye staring back, pale and alien. My stomach churned. The voice whispered my name, intimate and cold, and the temperature plunged. It sought contact, not overt harm. No physical threats, yet it was an insidious invasion of my mind, lacing my thoughts with its alien presence. My breathing grew shallow. With frantic energy, I hammered a small wooden board over the widened crack. The voice emitted a keening ululation that resonated not in the air, but directly within my skull. My fingers went numb, and I coughed, gagging on the phantom taste of ice. A choice loomed: abandon this house or confront the entity behind the wall. But this was my home now. Months of sweat equity poured into its reclamation, and I had no other haven. Could I relinquish it all for a whisper? I resolved to seal the breach utterly. I gathered my materials: heavy-duty cement, wire lattice, cans of sealant. I labored through the night, shirt clinging with sweat, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Each press of the trowel against the opening elicited a sibilant objection from the voice. It unspooled a litany of my failures, replaying the cruelest words I'd ever spoken to those I loved. My knees quaked, but I persisted, layer upon relentless layer, until the crack vanished beneath fresh concrete and paint, reduced to a barely perceptible line. As dawn broke, exhaustion claimed me. The basement felt marginally warmer, the silence profound. I collapsed onto an old stool, head in my hands, bracing for the voice's rage. Instead, it had retreated, diminished to a subliminal thrum, an echo I could almost persuade myself was mere memory. For a week, an uneasy truce prevailed. I avoided the basement, though a residual chill seemed to emanate from beneath the floorboards. Sleep remained fractured, haunted by the faceless dream figures, now more distant, their forms less defined. Gradually, I allowed myself to believe it was finished. Then yesterday, something shattered that fragile peace. I was downstairs, cautiously inspecting for dampness. The wall appeared solid, seamless, but as my gaze drifted across a patch of floor where water had evaporated, leaving a faint sheen, I saw my reflection in that aqueous simulacrum. My reflection's lips parted. I had made no sound, no movement. It regarded me, head tilting slightly, and behind its shoulder, I could discern the faint, superimposed outline of another face, featureless, yet undeniably watchful. The temperature plummeted. My heart seized. I scrambled backward, boots scraping concrete, unable to tear my gaze away, until I stumbled against the stair railing. The reflection's mouth formed my name, soundlessly, once more. I fled the stairs, heart battering my ribs as if seeking escape. Now I write this, hand unsteady, the door securely locked. The familiar cranial tension returns, a distant humming pressure. My tongue feels dry, tasting faintly of dust. The bathroom looking glass remains shrouded beneath a towel. I cannot endure my own face. Every polished surface seems poised to reveal a glimpse of something lurking, waiting, whispering. I feel its presence, within me now, not fully manifest, but settling in, growing comfortable in the shadowed corners of my psyche. The physical partition was erected, yes, but I fear I only granted it a more intimate dwelling. My thoughts, sometimes standing by the kitchen window as twilight descends, I catch my vitreous twin offering a discordant smile, mouthing words just beyond comprehension. And then, cutting through the silence, comes the softest susurrus, just below the edge of hearing, calling my name. A chilling reminder that nothing is ever truly sealed away. This is far from over. The day those looking glasses came into my possession remains etched sharp against the blur of memory. I was navigating the hushed labyrinth of an estate sale, a cavernous room choked with the ghosts of furniture and forgotten sundries. My own little shop, a haven for vintage speculums and curios tucked away on a less trodden street, wasn't exactly thriving, but a dedicated clientele kept the lights flickering. Then I saw them, 5 sentinels of Victorian glass, tall and imposing, ranked along one wall. Intricate woodwork, darkly stained, framed glass clouded by time, faint blooms of tarnish creeping in from the edges. Heavy, yes, steeped in weariness, yet some magnetism drew me closer. They'd slumbered in an attic for generations, the seller murmured, an impulse buy, pure and simple. I envisioned them restored, gleaming, fetching a respectable sum. Getting them back was an ordeal. My battered pickup groaned under their weight, each mirror rattling a nervous percussion against the truck bed despite the swaddling blankets. My muscles screamed protest as I wrestled them out, one by one, propping their considerable bulk against the back wall of my cramped establishment, nudging aside stacks of porcelain and brass. A cursory wipe banished the worst of the dust, but the glass itself received scant attention. Haste was my master that day. Morning found me unlocking the shop perhaps 30 minutes before the official turn of the key. Flipping the switches, bathing the space in artificial dawn, my gaze snagged on the mirrors. Instantly, a dissonance registered in the central panel. My own reflection seemed warped, a ripple in the antique glass, I first assumed. Stepping nearer, the image resolved, mostly faithful, save for one detail. The parting of my hair, stubbornly fixed to the left in reality, was here mirrored on the right. A quick, confirming sweep of my hand across my scalp yielded only the familiar arrangement. The other 4 panels showed no such anomaly. A shrug dismissed it. Distortion, an artifact of age. Later, a browser ambled in, his interest piqued by the quintet. Not yet ready for sale, I explained, detailing plans for refinishing the frames, polishing the silvered surfaces. Yet even as I spoke, my peripheral vision kept snagging on that central mirror. My reflection there seemed fractionally out of sync, a phantom figure moving with a subtly different cadence. Unease prickled beneath my composure, but I held my focus on the customer. Once he departed, I turned my back on the unsettling glass, busying myself with pricing dusty relics. Days bled into a week. I rearranged the shop, granting the mirrors prominence along the left wall, angling them into a semblance of uniformity. Patrons admired the ornate carvings, the sheer presence of the pieces, but none committed. In the lulls, I found myself drawn to them, scrutinizing my reflected self for flaws beyond the glass. Sometimes the second mirror from the left stretched me, adding phantom inches to my height. The first, occasionally, rendered me leaner. Other times, they presented a perfect, unremarkable facsimile. Curiosity finally outweighed caution. Notepad in hand, I undertook a deliberate examination. Before the first, I stood. Elias, clad in his usual denim and threadbare tee, but the face staring back seemed etched with a deeper fatigue, lines bracketing the eyes I hadn't consciously noted before. The second mirror shaved off years, smoothing the weariness. In the third, initial normalcy gave way to a subtle shift. My posture seemed straighter, imbued with an unfamiliar confidence. The fourth held the strangest trick. My clothes were accurate, yes, but a faded scratch marred the glass precisely over my left shoulder in the reflection. A scratch absent from the physical surface. The fifth, the final panel, seemed the truest, yet even there, a peripheral flicker sometimes betrayed a minute movement, untethered to my own. Its age, I insisted inwardly. Warped glass, tricks of light in this old building. I experimented with different bulbs. The anomalies persisted. Whispers began among the customers. Some found the effect intriguing, others confessed to a creeping unease. The mirrors became a vortex, pulling my attention. At closing time, I'd linger, captured by the 5 variations of myself. Breath shallow, neck muscles taut, my eyes would travel the line. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. Each Elias subtly distinct, yet the changes defied logic. A phantom limp sometimes haunted the second reflection, though my legs were sound. The third occasionally sported a ring on a finger I've always kept bare. One night, immersed late in inventory ledgers, the shop steeped in the low glow of a single lamp, I glanced up, my reflection in the second mirror. Moved. While I stood stock still, hands inert at my sides, its left hand deliberately rose. I froze, breath caught, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A glacial chill traced my spine. My fingertips prickled. Slowly, the reflected hand lowered. Then, its head turned, gaze sliding away from mine. My eyes darted around the silent shop. Nothing stirred. Slow, deliberate breaths did little to ease the constriction in my chest. I forced myself forward, nose almost touching the cold glass. My reflection stared back, perfectly mimicking my stance. I raised an arm, it mirrored the gesture, turned my head, it followed suit. A tremor started in my legs, but I held my ground. After a long minute, I retreated. A swift check of the other mirrors revealed nothing amiss. Locking up with trembling hands, I fled home to a night of fitful tossing, the image of that independent movement seared behind my eyelids. Logic offered no solace. The following day was an exercise in forced normalcy. It was imagination, fatigue, I told myself, unlocking the shop, greeting the sparse trickle of customers. Around midday, needing a moment, I found myself before the fourth mirror, the one with the phantom scratch. Watching intently, I saw my familiar self returned. Then, a sickening lurch of recognition. The scratch in the glass aligned perfectly, unnervingly, with a faint scar on my actual shoulder, remnant of a long-ago encounter with a misplaced nail. A scar barely visible in any ordinary mirror, yet here, starkly highlighted. My pulse surged. My hand instinctively went to the spot beneath my shirt, tracing the thin, raised line. By the close of the second week, each mirror had unveiled its own major inconsistency. One reflection intermittently wore spectacles. Another bore a small, unfamiliar tattoo on its forearm. A third sometimes sported the shadow of a beard. These glimpses were fleeting, random, never manifesting in more than one panel at a time. A constant, humming tension became my companion. When the shop emptied, I paced, flexing my shoulders, rubbing my hands, trying to dissipate the coiled stress. I began leaving the lights burning all night, dreading the morning encounter with potential darkness. One evening, after locking the door, I surrendered. Dragging out old drop cloths, I shrouded each mirror, extinguishing the unsettling reflections. A profound wave of relief washed over me as their surfaces vanished beneath the fabric. I left, collected some greasy takeout, and retreated to my apartment, seeking refuge. That night, sleep came deeper, more blessedly vacant than it had in days. Morning light, however, brought renewed anxiety. I pulled back the sheets, needing to confirm their stillness. The mirrors stood impassive under the fluorescent glare, until my eyes caught faint smears marring the glass, like handprints, but pressed from within. My stomach clenched. They were too ethereal for true prints, more like greasy silhouettes of fingers. Frantic rubbing with the cloth proved futile. The marks remained, ghostly testament to an impossible touch. Enough. They had to go. Grunting with the effort, wrestling their inert weight, I moved them, one by one, into the cluttered storage room at the back. Propped against the cold concrete wall, bathed in the stark flickering light of a single overhead bulb, they looked more sinister than ever. My heart hammered as I arranged them side by side, inadvertently creating a panorama of distorted Eliases, each subtly different, though I stood unwavering before them. A bruise bloomed on one cheek, another seemed inexplicably healthier, a third slumped with profound exhaustion. A lump formed in my throat, my legs unsteady. I refused to linger, quickly draping them once more in their shrouds before retreating to the relative sanity of the shop floor. Over the next week, I fought to banish them from my thoughts, but the effort was often undermined by faint, furtive sounds drifting from the storage room, a soft tapping, a dry brushing noise. Entering the room induced breathlessness. I started leaving the light on in there too, a constant, weak bulwark against the oppressive dread that thickened each time I passed the door. My appetite waned. Days became a tightrope walk of frayed nerves, startling at every creak of the old building. Nights were worse, sleep fractured by vivid, disjointed images, reflections moving asynchronously, versions of myself aged, scarred, tattooed, each bearing an alien expression. One quiet afternoon, the shop deserted, I ventured into the storage room to check inventory on a set of neglected chairs. As I stepped across the threshold, my breath hitched, chest tightening, mouth instantly dry. The shrouds lay pooled on the floor. All 5 mirrors stood bare, reflecting the harsh light and my own stunned face. I knew with chilling certainty I had covered them. Drawing closer, I saw them, my 5 reflections, subtly out of step. The first tilted its head, studying me with unnerving curiosity. The second seemed to hunched slightly, defensively. The third held a direct, challenging stare. The fourth and fifth remained largely still, yet I felt their eyes tracking my every movement. Sweat beaded on my forehead, my throat constricting. A primal urge to smash them warred with the knowledge of their antique value, and a deeper, colder fear of unleashing whatever resided within. My voice, when I finally found it, was a ragged whisper. "What do you want?" The absurdity of addressing my own image struck me, but the words escaped nonetheless. Silence answered. The reflection on the far left tilted its head again. The central figure lifted an arm fractionally, then let it fall. My heart pounded a deafening tattoo against my eardrums. I stood frozen, breathing shallowly, before desperation spurred me to action. Snatching a heavy canvas tarp from a corner, I lunged, throwing it over the first mirror, averting my eyes from the glass. Then the second, the third, fingers fumbling, trembling so violently I could barely maintain my grip. My foot caught the base of the third mirror, sending it teetering. A desperate lunge, straining muscles, saved it. Finally, all 5 were hidden. Panting, wiping sweat from my brow, I fled the room. That night, locking the shop felt insufficient. I felt violated, haunted not just by the mirrors, but by the intrusion into my own mind. Dreams were a chaotic reel of reflections refusing to obey, morphing into strangers who wore my face. Older, younger, marked by unfamiliar life experiences, each regarding me with unsettling awareness. I jolted awake repeatedly, pulse frantic, skin clammy. The next morning, steeling myself, I went straight to the storage room. The tarps remained undisturbed. A sliver of relief pierced the dread. Perhaps I could sell them quickly, as is, to someone less perceptive. I lingered, contemplating how to phrase the listing, the familiar weight settling in my chest, shoulders aching from sleepless tension. Then, a faint, dry, scraping sound emanated from behind the tarps, like fingernails drawn lightly across glass. My eyes shot to the corners of the room. Nothing, just dust motes dancing in the weak light. My stomach coiled. I realized I was holding my breath. Edging closer, the scraping ceased. Silence pressed in. How long I stood there listening to the void, I don't know. Eventually, I backed out and locked the door, though the flimsy lock offered little real security. I flipped the sign on the shop's front door to closed. Behind the counter, I sat, trying to regulate my breathing, the thudding of my own heart loud in my ears. My phone buzzed, ignored. The mirrors dominated my thoughts, squatting malevolently in the back room. The rest of the day dissolved into aimless pacing, furtive glances at the storage room door. a constant battle against the urge to check the tarps again. Every settling groan of the building made me jump. My body vibrated with tension, a dull ache blooming in my lower back, knees stiffening with anxiety. The thought of calling someone, anyone, surfaced only to founder on the certainty of disbelief. As dusk bled through the windows, clarity emerged from the fog of fear. I couldn't live like this. The decision solidified. I would load the mirrors into the truck, haul them across town to a secure, anonymous storage unit I rented. Distance perhaps could break their hold. Grabbing a dolly, I returned to the storage room. The door creaked open, tarps still in place. Yet stepping inside, the air felt tangibly heavier. My hands shook as I maneuvered the first mirror onto the dolly, careful to keep the tarp from slipping, careful not to meet any potential gaze through the canvas. The frame felt unnaturally cold against my palms. Eyes fixed on the floorboards, I wheeled it out, slid it into the truck bed, braced it with scrap lumber. Back for the second, the third, fourth, fifth. Each trip amplified the prickling awareness on my arms, the churning in my gut. Finally, tailgate slammed shut, straps cinched tight. I locked the shop, climbed into the cab, and pointed the truck towards the sterile anonymity of the storage facility. I fought the instinct to check the rearview mirror, terrified of glimpsing movement beneath those heavy tarps in the dimming light. And that's where I sit now, parked just outside the roll-up door of Unit B-17, engine ticking cool. The wind whispers against the tarp in the truck bed behind me, a sound that tightens my chest. My heart thuds a heavy, erratic beat. My mouth is desert dry. All that remains is to unload them, slide them into the darkness, lock the door, and drive away. Maybe then, silence. Maybe then, peace. I cling to the hope that confinement will quell the reflections, that distance will sever their connection to me. I just want my own life back, untainted by the chilling knowledge that my own image can betray me, that versions of myself might be waiting, watching, just behind the glass. That first glimpse of my new neighbors, enacting their peculiar tableau in the shadowed privacy of their backyard, struck me merely as a flourish of the unconventional. Suburbia, after all, bred its own quiet strains of oddity, but weeks bled into months, their nocturnal activities acquiring a disturbing cadence, a deepening stain on the neighborhood's placid facade. Suspicion, cold and sharp, began to prickle. The unassuming house beside mine, with its neatly trimmed hedges and silent windows, perhaps wasn't dormant at all, but dreaming a dark and ravenous dream. My own burgeoning curiosity, I realize now, was the first step onto a precipice, a path destined to fray the edges of my sanity and unravel the very weave of the reality I inhabited. My name is Alara, 34 years old, a weaver of words trading the city's clamor for this hushed enclave 6 months prior, hoping its quietude would nurture the novel blooming fitfully within me. This street, initially, felt like sanctuary, lawns like green velvet, smiles exchanged over fences, a fragile sense of belonging I'd craved. Then, the thorns arrived, dragging their peculiar atmosphere behind them like a shroud. Something about them resonated falsely from the start. Silas and Moira Thorne accepted my welcome offering, a basket laden with jams and local bread. With practiced politeness, yet their smiles were masks, their eyes holding no light. Their twin children, hovering near the cusp of adolescence, possessed an unnatural stillness, their gazes often fixed on me with an intensity that felt less like childish curiosity and more like appraisal. The dissonance began subtly, nocturnal murmurs, less song than guttural intonation, drifting from their yard, cryptic sigils chalked onto their garage door, stark white against the gray paint, only to vanish by dawn's first light. Deliveries arrived shrouded in canvas, bulky and indistinct, sometimes trailing a faint, cloyingly sweet miasma that clung to the air. I tried weaving explanations, flimsy threads of rationalization. Perhaps they were devotees of some esoteric philosophy, practitioners of an arcane craft. Harmless, surely. Then the first full moon after their settling cast its argent glow, and I was wrestling with a stubborn paragraph, the cursor blinking mockingly on the screen, when the sound began. A low, resonant chanting that pulsed not just through the air, but through the very structure of my house. Compelled, I extinguished my desk lamp and crept to the bedroom window, the one affording a clear view into their domain. The sight froze the marrow in my bones. There, gathered around a crudely assembled altar of fieldstone, stood the entire Thorn family, cloaked in obsidian robes. Silas, his face stark in the moonlight, intoned phrases from a tome bound in what looked disturbingly like aged leather, his voice a hypnotic drone in a tongue utterly alien. Moira stood sentinel beside him, moonlight glinting wickedly off the curved blade she held aloft, and upon the altar, bound and struggling weakly, lay a creature, a large quadruped, its form distorted, somehow wrong in its proportions. As I watched, paralyzed by a dread deeper than any I'd known, Moira raised the dagger high. The chanting swelled, reaching a feverish crescendo, and then I wrenched my gaze away, pressing my hands to my ears, yet the sound still pierced through. A high, agonized bleat, abruptly choked off by a wet, final gurgle. Sleep offered no refuge that night. I huddled beneath my duvet, trying to convince myself it was a nightmare conjured by stress and solitude. But morning revealed Silas, methodically hosing down a dark, viscous stain on their flagstone patio. The reality was undeniable, brutal. From that dawn onward, obsession took root. Unearthing the Thorn's truth became a consuming need. I began chronicling their movements, a meticulous logbook of every nocturnal errand, every whispered chant, every flicker of strangeness. The full moon rituals persisted, each iteration seemingly grander, more charged than the last. Tentative inquiries with other residents yielded nothing but blank stares or benign platitudes. Mrs. Gable from across the street lauded the Thorns' charming garden fates. It was a chilling isolation. I alone seemed attuned to the wrongness humming beneath the suburban harmony. One sun-drenched afternoon, seizing an opportunity while the Thorns were absent, I summoned my courage and peered through the grimy pane of their garage window. A strangled gasp caught in my throat. The interior walls crawled with complex, interlocking symbols and diagrams that made my eyes ache. Shelves bowed under the weight of glass jars containing specimens I could not, dared not, identify. Dominating the center of the concrete floor sat a massive, ornately carved chest, secured with heavy, archaic padlocks. The impulse to call the authorities screamed within me. Yet what tangible proof could I offer? Suspicions of cult activity, a half-glimpsed sacrifice? They would deem me delusional. No, evidence was paramount. I invested in a camera, one boasting a lens capable of bridging the distance, and began my clandestine documentation. The hushed arrival of hooded figures under cover of darkness, the increasingly frequent rituals that hinted at some looming culmination, the furtive transport of unsettlingly shaped bundles. It was during one such nocturnal vigil, utterly absorbed in capturing the flicker of ritual fire through my lens, that the world tilted violently. The soft click of my own back door opening went unheard until a hand, rough and smelling faintly of earth and that sickly sweet odor, clamped hard across my mouth, stifling the scream before it could form. "Now, now, Ilara," Silas Thorne's voice, a silken menace, breathed against my ear. Such intense curiosity rarely ends well for the inquisitive. Resistance was futile. I was propelled across the dew-slicked grass separating our properties and into the Thorns' backyard. Moira and the twins awaited, their faces smooth, impassive marble as I thrashed against Silas's unyielding grip. They forced me onto the altar, the stone still bearing the phantom chill and faint stains of rituals past felt like ice against my skin. "We held such promise for you, Ilara," Moira murmured, her tone unnervingly placid. "A willing acolyte, perhaps, but your prying nature, it simply wouldn't allow for peace, would it?" As their unified chant began anew, a profound lethargy descended. My limbs grew heavy, unresponsive. Thoughts swam in a thickening fog. Through this encroaching haze, I perceived Moira raising the curved dagger. Its blade seemed to pulse now, suffused with an eerie internal luminescence. She drew back her arm for the final strike, and then the night exploded. A blinding flash bleached the scene white, followed by a sonic boom that shook the very ground. Suddenly, the yard teemed with figures clad in armor that shimmered like captured starlight, wielding swords that crackled with raw, contained energy. The thorns scattered, emitting sounds of fury and primal fear that were utterly inhuman. The radiant newcomers pursued, relentless, save for one who knelt beside me on the altar. A warm hand touched my forehead. "Be still," resonated a voice like celestial harmonies. "The peril has passed." As the paralysis receded and clarity returned, I found myself gazing up at a being whose brilliance was almost painful to behold. They helped me sit, my limbs trembling. The backyard had transformed into a chaotic battleground. The Thorns fought with a terrifying ferocity, their bodies warping, twisting, momentarily defying the known laws of physics and sanity. What is happening?" The words scraped my throat raw. The entity beside me, an angel, something far older. My vocabulary had no word for them, spoke with gentle gravity. "Those you knew as the Thorns are not native to this plane. They are ancient predators, feeding on dissonance and dread. Our hunt for them spans dimensions." Even as they spoke, Silas Thorne unleashed a shriek that tore at the fabric of the night as one of the armored figures impaled him with a blade of pure light. His form seemed to implode, collapsing into a point of impossible density before vanishing utterly. The conflict ended swiftly thereafter. Moira and one of the twins suffered identical fates, disintegrating into nothingness. The remaining twin was subdued, bound in fetters of light that elicited agonized hisses. The being who had shielded me helped me to my unsteady feet. You have shown remarkable fortitude, Ilara, yet your trial is not entirely concluded. You have witnessed phenomena beyond human ken, glimpsed truths that could destabilize the foundations of your world. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What are you saying? Will you eliminate me? A sound like wind chimes stirred the air. Laughter. No, nothing so indelicate, but the integrity of your reality and ours must be preserved. We can excise these memories, allow you to return to your former existence, the slate wiped clean. Or, I whispered, caught between terror and a strange burgeoning exhilaration. Or you may choose to serve. Join our ageless vigil against the encroaching shadows that threaten not only this world, but all realities. The path is arduous, fraught with peril, yet it offers purpose and wonder far exceeding the scope of your previous imaginings. I stood there, adrift in the wreckage of my quiet life, my mind grappling with the impossible. The allure of forgetting, of sinking back into the comforting ignorance of my writer's existence, was potent. But gazing upon these luminous beings, upon the undeniable evidence of a cosmos vastly more complex and terrifying and beautiful than I had ever conceived, I knew retreat was impossible. The knowledge, once gained, could not be unlearned. "I'll do it," I declared, my voice finding unexpected strength. "I want to help." The being smiled, a radiance so profound it stung my eyes. "Then welcome, Ilara, to the Continuum Guard. Your initiation commences now." A shimmering rift opened in the air before us, a tear in the night, revealing swirling nebulae and impossible geometries. I cast one final glance at the familiar silhouette of my house, at the tranquil suburban street utterly oblivious to the cosmic horror it had so narrowly escaped. Then, drawing a breath that tasted of starlight and ozone, I stepped forward into the unknown, ready for whatever splendors and terrors awaited beyond the veil. Today, navigating the liminal spaces between dimensions, my former life feels like a half-remembered dream, yet regret finds no purchase here. For I know the truth now, that beneath the mundane skin of reality, an eternal war between luminescence and oblivion rages, and I stand, humbled and resolute, on the front lines, a guardian not just of my old, quiet street, but of all existence against the things that fester in the darkness between the worlds.